So the past few weeks, I think this is week 4 of our series, and we've spent some time talking about some wanderers in the Bible. In fact, we start talking about Eve, and Eve could have arguably been the greatest wanderer ever. And I know that sounds crazy because we're like, this whole thing's Eve's fault. Like, yes, it is, but hold on a minute. Can you imagine, instead of Eve wandering away from God, that if Eve would have wandered and taken her questions to God instead of to a serpent? Man, the things that God could have unlocked in that garden and the mysteries and things that if she would have gone and taken her wanderings to him, how much would we know now about God's kingdom and God's glory? I have so many questions just about the garden, just about creation. And Eve could have been the greatest wanderer ever, but instead she didn't wander. She wandered away and didn't trust the God that created her. Instead of taking her wanderers to her creator, she took them to a serpent. And so that wandering story wasn't really great, but we did get some neat wandering stories that we've talked about. We've talked about Jacob, the wanderer, the one that wrestled with God. And we talked about in our faith, there's times that we just got to get down and we've got to wrestle through it. We take our anger, we take our frustrations to God so he can make his presence known in our lives. And then we talked about the Apostle Paul, who used to be Saul, who actually murdered Christians that followed Jesus. But all of a sudden, Saul wondered what it would be like in his life as instead of pushing his agenda, he began to follow the voice of God in his life and follow God's agenda for his life. And so Paul was a wanderer as well. And then we talked about Mary, the mother of Jesus. What a wonder that story is, right? The angel came to her and gave her this crazy revelation. And instead of her doubting the angel and doubting the situation and doubting that she would be the mother of Jesus and she's still a virgin, instead of all these doubts, instead she was filled with wonder. And she asked the angel, like, what is it you want me to do next? And then I think today we got to see a modern day story of a wanderer that decided not to let go of the dream that God gave her and to settle in. And really the story goes right alongside of the story I want to share with you today. The story of Ruth, the wanderer. The wanderer who wondered what it would be like if she would, instead of chasing her own dream, instead live a life that's selfless with sacrifice and see what God could do with her dream. And so this morning, the title of today's message is, I will wonder about tomorrow. I will wonder about tomorrow. And I want to begin this morning by reading you guys the story of Ruth for all those Ruth who needs to be caught up on this story. This is Ruth, and I'm reading out the first chapter here. Then Elimelech died, and Naomi was left with her 2 sons. The 2 sons married Moabite women. One married a woman named Orpah, and the other a woman named Ruth. But about 10 years later, both Mahlon and Chilion died. This left Naomi alone with her 2 sons and her husband. Then Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had blessed his people back in Judah, where she came from, by giving them good crops again. So Naomi and her 2 daughter-in-laws got ready to leave Moab to return to her homeland. With her 2 daughters-in-law, she set out from the place where she had been living, and they took the road that would lead them back to Judah. But on the way, Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back to your mother's homes, and may the Lord reward you for your kindness to your husbands and to me. May the Lord bless you with security of another marriage." Then she kissed them goodbye, and they all broke down and wept. "No," they said, "we want to go with you to your people." But Naomi replied, and this is the same thought I'm having at this point, why go with her, right? Why should you go with me? Can I still give birth to other sons who could grow up to be your husbands? No, my daughters, return to your parents' homes, for I'm too old to marry again. And even if it were possible and I were to get married tonight and bear sons, then what? Would you wait for them to grow up and refuse to marry someone else? No, of course not, my daughters. Things are far more bitter for me than they are for you, because the Lord himself has raised his fist against me. And again they wept together, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye. But Ruth clung tightly to Naomi. "Look," Naomi said to her, "your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. You should do the same." But Ruth replied, "Don't ask me to leave you and turn back. Wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord punish me severely if I allow anything but death to separate us." So when Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go with her, she said nothing more. I don't know about you guys, but I feel like if I had to pick a side here, I'm probably going to be on Naomi's side, right? Like, I think if I was one of the daughter-in-laws, I'd like to say I would be like Ruth, but I don't know, you know? I think sometimes in my life, I get scared. Sometimes I worry about all the things going on in my life, and I kind of tend to think that if it were me, and maybe possibly if it were you, we'd kind of have some questions here. I think what Naomi said had a lot of logic to it. I mean, Naomi was telling them, go back to your homeland. Like, you have friends there, you have parents there, you have people, you have a home, you have things to do here. Like, I know we've suffered great loss, but guess what? There's still time for you to fix it, Ruth, right? Like, go back to your home, go back to your people, go back to these things. And I'm thinking about me, like, I would be like, heck yeah, Naomi, okay, goodbye, thank you for releasing me. I would be gone because I would have so much anxiety about the next day. I mean, this week I had maximum anxiety over hot tortillas because I got cold ones, not hot ones. My anxiety was through the roof. So I feel like this situation in itself would absolutely push me to the place of living in fear. And I would absolutely feel the need to all of a sudden step in and go, you know what, I've got to start making the smart moves, right? I got to start making the best moves. How many of you guys can be honest this morning and say, like, I've gone through that before. Something hard has happened. And instead of me first going to God and saying, God, what do you need? Instead, you're like, you haven't even thought that way. You just like get in the driver's seat and you were ready to go. And I was thinking about Ruth's story and she really didn't do that. She didn't do what we would all most likely tend to do, and that's begin to question our lives. That would begin to live in such fear, feeling like I've got to take control of this because this isn't going the direction that I wanted. I'm sure many of you women, as you hear this story, you're probably like me and probably like Ruth, like you probably had a dream of getting married, having the perfect marriage here and being able to raise kids and do the thing. And here Ruth is, her dream just seems like it's been shattered and it's fallen apart right before her very eyes. And I think in our world today, I think we live a lot of times in disappointment. We live a lot of times feeling like our dream has shattered before our eyes. And sometimes I think the dream or the idea that we have isn't even necessarily a dream that's from God, but maybe a dream that we think we're supposed to have. You know, in America, in this world today, we feel like if we don't have abundance of finances and we're super wealthy, that we somehow have not lived the dream. But yet, if that was true, if wealth and success was really living the dream, then why do we have so many people in Hollywood that have unlimited money and unlimited success, and those people seem to be the most happiest and oftentimes even suicidal? Because this dream that we've built and we've created in our head that makes us feel all this anxiety isn't even necessarily the dream that God has given us in our lives. And so here Ruth is, and Ruth had this discernment, this ability to see past her dream and to go, I'm going to step into this way. But like I said, for me, I think about the anxiety that situation would give me. I think about the fear that would be in my life, and I was thinking about the worry that happens sometimes in our life. When things don't seem like they're going according to our plan. When we're trying to go this way and all of a sudden the step feels like this way, fear and worry and doubt becomes into our mind. And we begin to feel like we have to get in control and start making moves to get this thing back online here. And we live in this place of worry. And you know what God says about worry? He says not to worry about tomorrow. In Matthew, Jesus says, refuse to worry about tomorrow. Not like don't, like it's a good idea. He says you need to refuse to worry about tomorrow, but deal with each challenge that comes your way one day at a time, because tomorrow is going to take care of itself. Be present today. Don't worry about tomorrow. That's why today's message is wonder about tomorrow. Don't worry about tomorrow. In fact, he says that we should not just not worry, we should refuse to worry, but that we should pray and rely on him. In Philippians, it says, don't fret or worry. Instead of worrying, pray. Let petitions and praises shape your worries into prayers, letting God know your concerns. Before you know it, a sense of wholeness, everything coming together for good, will come and settle you down. It's wonderful what happens when Christ displaces the worry at the center of your life. You know, I think sometimes we just read over the word wonderful and we think like, oh, that's going to be good. It's going to be good when Christ displaces my worry. It's not saying it's going to be good. It's saying it's going to be wonderful. When God takes over our life can be full of wonder because he's going to do something bigger and better than we could even imagine. Whatever this plan is that we let go on and we're casting our cares on him and we're not going to worry about this anymore, we now have the ability to wonder about it. And our life can be wonder-filled. And because of that, God says that when these things happen in our lives that give us a place where we can actually be filled with wonder, it says to give thanks. In 1 Thessalonians, it says, in the midst of everything, be always giving thanks, for this is God's perfect plan for you in Christ Jesus. God doesn't want us to worry. He doesn't want us to doubt, but he does want us to wonder about tomorrow. He wants us to wonder when we live our life according to his purposes and we begin submitting our plans for his plans. He wants us to wonder what he can do with that. Wonder what we can do with our life. And I feel like that's what Ruth was doing. Ruth was trusting this God that she didn't even know, and she was saying, I'm going to give up my dream for your dream, God. And I don't even know you, but I know that this God of Naomi is her God. And so I'm going to follow her and be faithful to her. But to do that, I've got to be faithful to you. And she says that your God will be my God. And I think we all sit in here today and we all say, well, we're just like Naomi. That's our God too. But I think what this made me really question in myself is, even though I say he's my God, is he always really my God? Is he really my God? Because that happens in our life sometimes is when we start pursuing our dreams more than his dream. Our dream is our God, not him in our life. And that becomes what we think about all the time. That becomes what we obsess about all the time. And I will say in this season of my life, I obsessed more about God's plan and God's dreams than any other time in my life. But I can't say that that's not always what I obsess about. There's other things that I obsess about. Sometimes I obsess about my life. Sometimes I obsess about problems. Sometimes I obsess about other situations. But Ruth didn't obsess. She trusted God enough to lay down her dream in exchange for him. And I don't know about you guys, but I'd rather live the God-given dream for my life than my dream for my life. However, I think oftentimes God-given dreams for our life are more about others than about ourselves. And I think that we serve a God that is big enough, that is wonderful enough, that is creative enough, that in turn, as we live out our dream that helps and blesses other people, God still takes care and blesses us. But God isn't going to give you a dream that only involves yourself. God is so big that he is going to give you a dream that leads to helping other people. That's bigger than us. And I appreciate this about Ruth. I appreciate that she was able to lay down her dream and instead support the dream of someone else. And then I think about what happened with her story. I mean, here she is. She decides to go with Naomi, and she doesn't know anybody. And they're actually going to Bethlehem, ironically, the town that Jesus would be born in years later. But they don't know the wonder of that plan. They just know they're going back to to Naomi's town in Bethlehem. And Naomi's not really a happy camper. I know in that story right there, she seemed like a really thoughtful mother-in-law. But how many of you know like a Debbie Downer? Like they're always down about something. So this is what Naomi does when she gets back to Bethlehem. And everyone goes, oh, Naomi, it's so great to see me. I see you. She goes, no. It's not actually really great to see me. In fact, I've changed my name. I have a new name now. Oh, okay, Naomi, what's your new name? Well, my new name is Mara, and it means bitter. I just want everyone to know how bitter I am. So I don't know about you guys, but if I made the first step to I'm going to sacrifice my life. I'm going to follow this lady's dream because I want to follow God, and I feel like God is leading me over here, and I've strapped myself to this person, and now they are bitter. I'd be like, oh, Naomi, I think about this a little bit differently now. You know what? You were right. And I would start stepping back from that situation because here she is. She's hitched on to Naomi, who's bitter. Naomi, who is older and can't care for herself. Naomi, who doesn't have a job. Naomi, who's not going out and bringing in income. Naomi is just sitting there in this house, bitter. She doesn't want friends. She doesn't even want solutions. She is just bitter. And so Ruth begins to serve, and Ruth begins to actually go to a field, and back in Bible times, you could go to fields and you could kind of clean up whatever grain was left and use it to take back to your family. So Ruth begins to serve in this field, and she'd go back every day and take care of Naomi. And I'm sure it kind of sounded like this, like I've got my grain and my food, and I've worked up sweat all day. I've been like a servant out in the field, and I take it back to Naomi, and I'm like, Naomi, I did so well for you today. And then Naomi's like, just leave it on the counter. I'll be in my room. Right? Because she's so bitter. And here Ruth is. She's just endlessly serving. She's left her people. She's left her home. Now she's in the field. She's serving this lady that's bitter. This just doesn't seem right. But all of a sudden, just about that time is when her story began to change. In fact, Ruth goes on to meet the person that owns the land. His name is Boaz. And eventually, with a long turn of events, her and Boaz end up getting married. And her and Boaz begin, and they have a child. And then this child has another child, and then that child has another child. And that child's name is King David. Because what happened was when Ruth began to submit her plan and instead pick up God's plan, Ruth found herself in the lineage of not only King David, but the lineage of Jesus, who would one day be right there in that exact city, being born to be the Savior of the world. See, sometimes we don't realize that when we're fighting for our plan, we're fighting against His plan. And He's got this huge plan in our life that's immeasurably more that we can't even fathom. This plan would actually unfold. And what's so crazy is Ruth's dream was fulfilled. Ruth ended up with a happy marriage with a man that had wealth, and they ended up with the perfect family and the perfect great-grandson. I'm sure she was really braggadocious about that. But more than in anything, Naomi's dream was able to come true as well. And it talked about when Boaz and Ruth had that baby, that baby became Naomi's pride and joy. And that Naomi's name was no longer bitter because that was the God of promise that had fulfilled her dream. So Naomi ended up having grandsons and was also part of the line of Jesus, all because one person said, I'm going to sacrifice my dream for God's dream. Instead of worrying about tomorrow, I'm going to wonder about tomorrow. I'm going to wonder instead of worry. And I think it's so amazing that that's the kind of God we serve. The God that just goes like, just stop worrying, right? Just stop, give this to me. And I don't know if we connected on the praise and worship this morning. I mean, I don't know if you guys were listening to the words, but it was all about going, God, I'm going to surrender my will to you, God. I'm going to lay this in your hands because you're the miracle worker. You're the way maker. You're the God that can do anything. And even when I don't realize you're working, you're working. And even when it doesn't feel like you're working. And here Ruth is. I'm sure she went through that array of emotions. Even though she was doing the right thing, she had to feel like, Naomi, I don't know why we're serving your God. Your God's wild. Your God took your husband, both of your sons, led you back to a town. You're bitter, and I'm picking up scraps off the ground, right? I'm sure she had to have emotions to feel like, I wonder if her God is really working. I wonder if her God is really working. And so I was amazed by this story of this woman that allowed God to be her God. And this morning, that really kind of brings me to my first point, to live a life that really wonders. We have to let God be our God. It's not enough for just us to say that God is going to be our God. We have to let God be our God. And like I said earlier, we live in this culture that idolizes success. It idolizes our finances. It idolizes what we look like on the outside. Some of us idolize our kids. Some of us idolize our job, right? We idolize all these things in the name of we just want to be happy. We want to have success. But I want to challenge you to realize that success isn't what looks best on our Pinterest page. Success isn't what we post on our Instagram or our Snapchat or our Facebook, right? That's not what success is. But really, success is being able to say that I've lived and honored God every single day of my life. That is the definition of success. That's the meaning of life. When we begin to submit our plans to Him, all of a sudden, He can use us in ways that we never thought imaginable. And I know it doesn't seem right. It seems backwards, but God's kingdom is backwards because what happens is we begin living a life that honors God, and it's not really about us anymore. But somehow in the mix of us living our life for God, which in hands lives our life for others, somehow it ends up that we end up being blessed the most. And I think that's why Jesus said it's more blessed to give than to receive. I don't think he was just talking about your tithes and offerings. I was thinking he was talking about the way that we lived out our lives. And I'm embarrassed to say, if I was Ruth, I don't know if I would have taken that doctrine. I don't know if I would have thought about Naomi. I think I would have thought about me. And I think I would have thought for me, but Ruth had to make a decision that if I'm going to follow Naomi, that I've got to let her God be my God. And what happens in our life is when we let God be our God, that means we are letting him lead. His plan, his presence is what we idolize in our life. Not the things of this world, but his plans and his purposes. And I think sometimes we sit and we go, okay, Pastor, so that sounds good. I want to follow God's voice, but bad news is I never hear from him. I never hear his voice. Well, the good news is that you don't have to always hear his voice because the Holy Spirit lives inside of you. The Holy Spirit lives inside of you, and it says that his voice will lead you and guide you into all truths. And when we have an awareness of that principle, we can allow God to be our God. I think sometimes the reason that we don't allow God to be our God is because we're scared of what is going to happen. We're scared that he's not actually going to lead us and he's not actually going to be with us. And I think that's what made it so important. When Jesus was here, he came down as a man in the flesh so people could believe, so people could see him and so he could redeem us. But more than that, he came so you could see what it was like to be in his presence. And right before he left, he said this. He says, I'm leaving here, but I'm actually leaving you with something better. You know, I can't imagine something better than like Jesus in the flesh, like walking me everywhere. I went every day and I'm like, what do I do? Red or blue? Blue. What do I do now? Cheetos or Doritos? Cheetos. Like that would be amazing to me. Like it would be like the best friend ever. But here's what Jesus said. He says, I'm leaving you with something better than me. I'm leaving you with the Holy Spirit that is always with you. Because if I'm asking you to let me be your God, then I've got to give you a God that's big enough that you can trust him because you know he's always there. That's when we let God to be our God. And I think part of allowing God to be our God is laying down things in our life that have maybe taken his place. And that's my second point today is to really wonder. We're going to have to put down to pick up. To really wonder, we have to put down to pick up. And I think that our plan is very controlled. I think for some of us are probably more control freaks than even others, and it's hard to let down with the control in your life. But I was thinking about anxiety and how we live in this anxiety, and I heard a pastor say that, you know, it's not really tomorrow that the problem is. It's not thinking about tomorrow that causes anxiety. It's trying to control tomorrow that's causing anxiety. And what's crazy is in America, because we are the land of the free, we have more control over our lives than almost any nation in the world, right? Anybody could be anything. You have all these options. We have access to things that people in this world never get access to. But alongside us being this first world country with all these first world problems, we have more anxiety than probably almost any nation in the world. You don't see third world countries having to take pills and go to therapy and do all these things because they're not trying to control their life, because they don't even have the freedom to. And somehow this freedom that God gave us to bless us, instead we've taken this freedom and tried to control every facet of our lives. And instead of relinquishing over to God and going like, when God was in control, he gave us the greatest gift ever, an eternity of freedom. Instead of thinking that way, we begin to think of, I have all of these options and I have to make myself great. And if I don't look out for number one, nobody else is, right? And I think if we were honest, we all go through things like that. And maybe it's not this big, grandiose plan, but maybe it's when we get to work and we realize that if we don't get into the break room first and get the first cup of coffee, that there might not be any left. I got to look out for number one, because there ain't going to be any left by the time I get there, right? I don't know about you guys, but when I go shopping and I'm watching the lines and like, ain't nobody gonna cut me, right? And I've got like 5 kids, and so we almost like make a border here, like a barrier. Like, ain't nobody cutting the Pitkin family, because we're looking out for number one. We're getting through this line the fastest and most effectively, right? I think we feel the need all the times in our life to look out for number one. That's why sometimes in traffic, when we're all merging, we don't let that person go in front of us. Like, they're not getting in front of me, right? Because I'm looking out for number one. Imagine a life in which we were always looking out for number one. Imagine a life like Ruth that we said, God, I'm going to put myself aside for a minute and I'm going to help somebody else that's going through something hard. And God, I know this seems like I'm going backwards here, but God, I'm going to set this down here. I'm going to set down my dream. I'm going to set down my passion for me. And instead, God, I'm going to see what you want me to pick up in my life. And I think so many times we don't do that. We don't want to submit to his plan, but what we don't realize was his greatest plan for our life might be one step away, one step of surrender. Our destiny or our dreams might be right there at our fingertips. We just don't know it because we think it's this way and God's going, no, it's really this way. And I'm taking you there, but you've got to learn to trust me. And that's really what Ruth did. Ruth laid down her dream. She couldn't get to Boaz without going to Bethlehem, but she couldn't go to Bethlehem and stay in Moab the same time. She had to lay down Moab to go to Bethlehem. But when she went to Bethlehem, she found her Boaz. She found what she thought was her dream, but really it was the master plan of the Creator. Because the dream led her to Boaz that could bring forth King David, that could bring forth the complete line of Jesus, all out of one town of Bethlehem. See, our God, he's a mysterious miracle worker. He's not only working out miracles, he does it in these clever ways. And sometimes I think we think in our life that he's just not paying attention and life's all coincidence, but it's not. Everything is ordained, and we're part of this plan he has going. And we have no idea what one of our steps could be that causes this ripple effect. It causes this ripple effect in our life. You know, you've always heard the theory of like if one mosquito in the forest bites a tiger, would it change the world forever? I feel the kingdom works that way at times. I feel like God has these plans lined out for us, and when we say yes, it falls into his perfect plan, and it's all aligned and ordained to where he's trying to take us. But part of being able to be part of that plan is being okay with the mystery. Being able to submit our plans and our control and go, God, I'm going to follow you. And that's exactly what Ruth did that day. She took a step away from her dream, but it was actually the biggest step towards her destiny. What she thought was going backwards was really going forwards by giving up on her dream. And I saw this quote yesterday, and it says, don't ever serve the dream more than you serve God. And I thought about my life, and I thought about how many times instead of fighting for what God's calling me to do, I sometimes fight for my dream. I fight for my way, and when I serve the dream more than I serve God, that dream actually becomes an idol in my life. And I think we sometimes think of idolatry as this Old Testament word where we make golden calves, but idolatry is anything that we worship and sacrifice to more than we sacrifice to our God. And I think it's incredible that Ruth was someone who had no knowledge of this. She was able to hear God's voice enough that she was able to lay down the idol of my dream and my plan, and instead be able to take hold of what Naomi had. Sometimes the very circumstances in our life that we try and change are the very circumstances that God is using to change us. And Ruth could have hated the circumstances, and she could have gone and made life her way. But instead, she rode out the circumstances. And in that journey, God began to change her and make her into the woman that he needed her to be, to bring forth the Savior that he needed him to be. Because she submitted her plans to God. And I was thinking about it, a lot of times our destiny, our dream, whatever's great in our life kind of shows up unexpectedly. Usually our destiny is disguised and we miss it. And you say, well, Pastor, so that's not true. People that have a dream, they follow their dream their whole life. Do they? Because David's dream, David's destiny was unveiled to him while he was counting sheep in a field. And Peter's dream was unveiled to him one day when he was on the boat fishing. And Ruth's dream was unveiled to her one day when she was out in a field picking wheat. See, our dreams sometimes are wrapped up in something called work, something called servanthood, something called surrender. Which leads me to my last point for today, and that is to really wonder, you must look for what you can glean. Trusting God means gleaning from others and gleaning from circumstances. And you go, why are you using this glean word? That's a weird word. And I actually Googled it, and it's used more in 2017 than any time in like 100 years. But it's still not a very popular word, right? So why are you saying glean? Well, when I was reading about the story of Ruth and I was reading about the process that she went through, the process of going into these fields was called gleaning. And what gleaning is, this is a word that they used back in Bible times. In biblical times, there was a Hebrew law. It was kind of like the Hebrew welfare system. And the Hebrew law said this: if you own property and you have people that come and you harvest your crops, anything that falls to the ground, as well as the corners of your land, you don't harvest those, you leave those there. And the people from the city that are poor and impoverished can come and they can pick up whatever scraps that you have left. This was called gleaning. This is how they assured the poor would be taken care of and that the wealthy wouldn't have too much. And when I saw that definition, it was amazing to me because I was thinking about the economy in our world now of gleaning. Gleaning is going to a place in our life where we're open to learn from every circumstance and every situation that we're in. Gleaning is a time in our life when we're able to go now and pick up the things that people are dropping. Gleaning for us is sometimes being in a place of servanthood instead of honor. And I think all the times in our life we think in order for us to get to our destiny, we just need to keep being on top. And we're trying to speed through our life to get to where we're going instead of really learning to glean during the process. I mean, it happens for us ladies. Even when we're a little girl, we begin dreaming of getting married. Our dream is like, as soon as I can, I'm putting on this white dress. I already have it planned because I'm fast forwarding to the finish line instead of worrying about what I need to glean along the way. And I saw this quote, I was reading a book, and I loved it. And it said that pride goeth before the fall, but humility comes before honor. In the spiritual order of things, it's inviolable. Pride won't put you in a position of leadership until you take a posture of servanthood. See, God had big plans for Ruth. God has big plans for us, but until we are learning how to serve and how to glean, He can't promote us into a position of leadership because we won't be ready when we get there. And I think so many times in church, we come into church and we surrender our life to God because we think by surrendering our lives to God, He's going to take us on the fast track of success. And then we immediately get frustrated when we started serving God. And I served in the nursery last week, and guess what? Didn't get the job promotion this week. Maybe God's asking you to spend some time serving in the nursery so you can glean, so when that job promotion comes, that you'll be ready. And I find it funny that that's exactly what Ruth was doing. Ruth had no idea that her season of gleaning was the season that was setting her up to get to the season of her destiny. The season of why she was here, but she couldn't find out why she was here until she gleaned first. And when we're gleaning, God begins to open up doors unexpectedly in our lives. And for Ruth, it was the door to Boaz. It was the door that she was able to meet what the Bible calls her kinsman redeemer. The man that would marry her and redeem her from all of these things that have happened in her family and Naomi's family, he would give them a new right and give them a new name. And I think sometimes that our Redeemer is opening doors for us to redeem seasons of our life that maybe we feel like are lost. Dreams that we feel like are so far we'll never be able to achieve those dreams. We'll have to lay those things down because if we don't fight for these things, we're going to lose them all. And God's really saying, if you'll go to the field, if you'll go glean, if you'll go to the door that I opened for you, you'll be amazed at what I can do in your life. You're going to be amazed to see the immeasurably more. I'm sure for Ashley, her season in the daycare was a season of gleaning for her. But God, I want to be home with my baby boy. And now Charles is gone. My kids go to 2 different schools and I'm going crazy. And God's going, just glean here. Just glean here because you're going to be amazed at where we're going. But sometimes we got to go through the valley before we can get to the mountaintop. But the good news is growth happens in the valley, but sometimes we only see it from the mountaintop. And I think we give way more credit to the mountaintops than we do the valleys in our life. And I think when we get to the mountain, we have a different perspective. That's why when they interview people that have made it in Hollywood, they don't go, it's all about here. You interview people that have had successful lives and successful careers. They don't talk about what it's like on the mountain. They always talk about what happens on the valley. When people are in the valley, they don't talk about the valley at all. Sometimes we're embarrassed about the valley. Those times that we're going and we're just gleaning, we're picking up the scraps of what everyone has left while we go home to our bitter mother-in-law. We don't talk about those moments, but actually those moments are where we're being made. Those moments are the moments that are stepping us into our destiny and our purpose in our life. Those moments are the moments when God is beginning to change us. Maybe God's more interested in changing us than our circumstances. And maybe sometimes when we're changed, we begin to change our own circumstances. And then God just gets to come around and sprinkle some miracle dust on him and do immeasurably more. But sometimes we want to do that backwards. We want the immeasurably more, but we want to stay here. We want to stay in Moab, but we want the blessings of Bethlehem. But we have got to step away from Moab to get to where we're going. We've got to serve so we can lead. We've got to go through the hard seasons of questioning God and really understanding who he is. So in that next season, we'll be sure and give him the glory. That next season, our dream and our destiny can be bigger than just us. If your dream is just about you, that's a lame dream. This church is a church of dreamers. We're a church of wanderers. We're a church that sits around and figures out what we're going to do to change the world around us. We believe it's not just about us, because just about us is pretty lame. And it's not very fulfilling because it's not what we were created to do. And when we become who God's created us to be, there's nothing more fulfilling than living that life. The problem is we don't ever know what part of our journey is where God is trying to do something. And we like to think that God does something at the highlights of our journey, when sometimes God's doing what he's doing during the low lights of our journey. It's when we're working the hardest that God's at work the most as well. And here's a scripture out of Ecclesiastes. It says, just as you'll never understand the mystery of life, the mystery of forming inside of a pregnant woman, so you'll never understand the mystery at work and all that God does. So go to work in the morning and stick it out until evening without watching the clock. Do good without worrying about the clock. Just go and live your lives and serve. Because you never know from one moment to moment how your work will turn out in the end. You don't know what God's trying to do. And while you're sitting there complaining about your life and complaining about your circumstance and watching the clock for this season to end, that might be your most significant season you will ever have. That might be the best, greatest season you've ever had, because it's the season that's launching you into your destiny. That's your springboard season. And we don't even realize it. And because we don't realize it's our springboard season, we never are able to jump, because we didn't realize that God was preparing us and launching us. We worried about tomorrow. We didn't wonder about tomorrow. Because when you're wondering about tomorrow, when God says it's ready, you take that leap. And that leap doesn't have any fear, because you know that your foundation is laid, that you've done the work, you've gleaned, you've sacrificed, and you allowed God to be your God. And when we do that in our life, there's no telling what God can do with our life. Just because what God's doing in your life isn't a part of your plan doesn't mean it's not a part of his. And that his plan is even better. In fact, his plan is so good that even when we find ourselves in something in our life that isn't God's plan for our life, he still works that out for good. And in fact, the Bible says this in Romans. It says, and we know that all things work for good for those who love God and those who are called according to his purpose. See, if I'm called to my purpose, I don't know if it's going to work out for good. But when I'm called according to his purpose, it says that he's constantly at work, working all things for good. He's just cleaning up my messes and making things play into motion. Every time I miss a line, he redirects, and we're back on track again, because he's working things out for good. He's ordaining my steps. He's right with me. And when I'm right with him, there's no telling what God can do in my life. There's no telling the things that he can unlock to me. And God uses wonder. Wonder is my fancy word for faith. Wonder is this fancy word for just trusting God. Wonder is this fancy word for not just trusting God enough to take away the burden, but to bring forth life from anything. Wonder is the feeling that you get when you sit at the cross of your Savior and you're his mother, and you look up at this cross and you go, this is the worst day in history. And it becomes the greatest day in history because you trusted God to do what he said he would do. And that's immeasurably more. And sometimes the worst things in our life, the worst seasons that we go to, are just springboards getting us ready to where God's trying to take us. So church, today, I hope you're leaving this place encouraged. I hope God spoke things to you in your life that may be things that we're not quite putting in his hands, that we're trying to control on our own. I would challenge you to even do an inventory. God, are there areas in my life that I'm actually worshiping more than you? Are there ideas or identities that I think are going to bring me to happiness because I'm still frustrated? That might actually be the problem. Instead of casting our cares on him, instead of not worrying about tomorrow, instead of running to him with prayer and thanksgiving and going, God, I don't know why we're here, but I know you're a miracle worker. I know you're a promise keeper. I mean, God's a game changer in our life. But we can't change the game until we submit it over to him.